welcome back from the break. Earlier this week, Cardinal George Pell was convicted of sexually assaulting two choir boys on two separate occasions in 1996. Whilst some believe he will indeed serve time in jail, others think his involvement with the church may lead to a lesser sentence. For this week's Vox Pop, Tegan hit the streets of Perth to find out people's thoughts on the matter and see whether or not they think the church has undue influence over our justice system.
This week, Cardinal George Pell was convicted on 2 counts of child sexual abuse. I've come to ask the public if they believe he's guilty or not, and if his position in the church will affect his sentencing. Do you think Cardinal Pell's guilty or not?
Well, that's what the jury has decided, that he's guilty. Being a Catholic all my life, it's very hard to believe, but I'm not in a position. And so I believe that if that's what's happened, that's what's happened. We just have to wait and see appeals, but it seems to me that the evidence is overwhelming.
It definitely sounds like it, but not being there, I don't know. I can't say.
Yeah, it doesn't look good for him, but it's a hard one. You just don't know, but I don't know, you only really can tell from the media, and unless you know him yourself.
From what I've heard, yes, I do. Yeah, I think if there's any inkling of that kind of thing.
Do you think his position in the church will allow him to have a longer or a shorter sentence, do you think?
It'll probably allow him to have a shorter sentence, but it shouldn't. There should be no difference between the clergy and anyone.
I hope he gets longer, but I think he should be sentenced the same as everyone else. But I think they probably will because of all the media.
I would probably say shorter, unfortunately. If he's guilty, he should, do the time.
He will probably get a longer sentence, whether he does that in jail term or whether he does it in a separate environment, community environment, would be hard to say. He's going to be very vulnerable in prison because he will be certainly the target of a lot of inmates. So I think they've got to weigh up where they do put him, if that was the case. But whether it's long term, I think probably maybe 10 years, maybe.
And do you think it will actually stamp out what's happening within the church, or do you think it will still happen underneath their noses?
Oh, gosh. I think it'll probably, I think it's going to probably keep happening everywhere, isn't it?
I think if there's still people that want to do it, they'll do it. So, regardless of whether someone's been outed.
I would hope it would stamp it out. I would not want to see this occur again because it's damaging to the actual Catholic faith and it's damaging to the beliefs that we hold.
But do you also believe the church does have some kind of authority over the justice system, or they should, or not?
Oh, absolutely not. I don't think the church should have any rights whatsoever in the justice system.
Yeah, but do you think it will also give people the strength to look out and, to open up and say, oh, this happened to me?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I can only hope so, but I can't really say to what their mindset will be. Hopefully we can eventually, basically make the priests stand up for what they're doing and stop it.
This has been Tegan for Undercurrent.
In our last story this week, Alex heads to Mount Hawthorn to attend the My Health, Your Health Forum, where he spoke to several health professionals about the increase in bloodborne diseases and STIs amongst immigrants and Indigenous Australians.
How important is the My Health, Our Health Forum?
Look, I think it's a very important forum. It's bringing together the work that we've done in the last 3 years, but more importantly, there are some what I would call startling findings in terms of something that we actually did but we didn't propose to do in our response to the tender 3 years ago. I'm talking about the testing initiative that we facilitated along with the Royal Perth Hospital and some GPs and Clinipath, which enabled many people who received our information sessions and who chose to be tested to have access to the testing in a very convenient venue and a time of their choice. And what we found was absolutely startling. The people who tested positive, if you look at the rates of people who tested positive, particularly in some class intervals, they're very disproportionately higher than the mainstream Australian population. The other population that we obviously are concerned about are the Indigenous people, and that's because of their over-incarceration rates, which accounts for a much higher rate of hepatitis. Now, the important stuff is this: every single person who tested positive to hepatitis is either requiring active monitoring or treatment. So we cannot take this lightly. I've got about 130 staff. 127 of them are born overseas, and they speak 68 different languages. Now, so the cultural and linguistic, capacity that we have is next to, to anyone, in this country, and that's what makes and makes it important that organizations like ours are involved in complementing the work that mainstream agencies do.
This is a really important forum, and I'm really pleased to be here. It's important because we know that migrant communities, particularly migrant communities from Southeast Asia, have one of the highest rates of hepatitis B and C in Australia. And we need to do more, and this is a really important forum for us to understand how we can do more.
So what can you tell us about the STIs and bloodborne pathogens in India?
Yeah, in India, as you know, we have about currently estimated to have about 2.1 million people living with HIV, and about less than about 3% of our population. Okay, I would say having all of these bloodborne pathogens. HIV less than 1%. Hepatitis B less than 1%, and hepatitis C less than 1%. So that's the estimates that we have in India. Amongst the rates for these STIs, like syphilis, it's coming down. Donovanosis is coming down. Herpes simplex and chlamydia is still on the rise. And we feel that most of these sexually transmitted infections can result in certain health hazards for the mothers in the reproductive age group. And you would find that with syphilis, you can have transmission of syphilis to the child and resulting in congenital syphilis, which should be eliminated. We have about 10,000 cases reported each year. My role here today is to ensure that I project the activities that the government in India are doing, and so that we can have lessons learned from both sides, and perhaps help us in achieving our goals. It's a common goal to eliminate all of this infection. Perhaps I will gain some ideas from what is happening here and take it back and incorporate it into my practice there.
For some bloodborne viruses, some indigenous populations are disproportionately affected, such as the very high prevalence of HTLV1 in some Australian Aboriginal communities. Of course, there are also certain cultural practices which could increase the risk of transmission of bloodborne viruses, such as the risks of HCV infection with tattooing and other body-piercing practices wherever infection control measures are not implemented. There are risks that individuals or even communities which live in these settings, in high-burden HIV, hepatitis settings, could be stigmatized and discriminated against because of broader community perceptions that they actually pose a risk to the broader population by contributing to the spread of such viruses.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Undercurrent. That's all we have time for, but we'll be back next week with more local news and current affairs for you. I'm Deanna Cooney, your host. Have a lovely week.